Hello, everyone. Um, I decided to react to this email invitation or notification for the upcoming or forthcoming Pallas Projects programming under the title, I have it here, Do It Together. It had a kind of ring of the AI's get together, which now maybe is 10 years old, maybe more, I don't know. But for me, it heralds this conditioning that we see now in the art scene, and that is this idea of collectivity and community. It's very institutional language that has a kind of cultural capital, especially with funding bodies. And the language therein, especially in the press release, and I always find press releases really interesting. I also find artist statements really interesting, especially from the position of the art critic, because they are a way in. They're always a kind of weak link. And when a press release is either too balanced in terms of it's doing this or that, and it's up to the viewer to make sense of it, or it's too ideological in that it's stating a particular position, there's always leakages, critical leakages in those ideologies being pronounced or performed because we are in a cultural environment in which we're always performing through this language, especially now with AI, which has another kind of performative element to use particular syntax. And I'm not saying this press release is done in AI, it feels human, but it definitely feels human because there's grains of critique in it, especially when you think of ideology, especially the artist-run ideology, which I am all behind. I romanticize the artist-run endeavor or artist-led endeavor, whatever you want to call it, because it's something that I emerged as an artist and art critic. The best exhibitions were happening, if not in graduate shows, where there was a lot of abject leakage, and play and experimentation and, the breaking down of identities, etc. In artist run spaces, you also got that. You got the crumbling walls, you got the, you know, bad electrics, you got the cold and damp, you got the artist run ethos, the bring your own beer mentality, and to support the audience, which were all artists, we're all young. It was a youth movement, and it grew on that. So Pallas is different in a sense. Here we have 30 years of Pallas, and this is what this new programming is heralding. It's stating. You have to ask the question whether Pallas is an artist-run organization or an institution. Going back to this idea of the artist run versus the institution, I'm always questioning that idea of the artist run as a short-lived kind of flame that pushes things out there, especially in its early years. And there's a real motivation to garner attention, but also there's a kind of collectivity, of course, within the artist run ethos and its development. But also there's a kind of brazenness about it. And the context in which Artist Run emerged, Palace itself in 96, are interesting also because this is the moment of the Celtic Tiger. There's lots of money. But I remember as a student in NCID, and whether it was Gavin Murphy or Mark Cullen, who presented there when I was an MFA student in 2008. It was one of them, but he showed all these images. I think it was Gart Phelan and others. And they felt they were for a group of students that really didn't know what the outside world looked like, especially someone like me coming from rural Wicklow, rural Ireland. They presented this aesthetic that I really wanted to be part of. I found the commercial galleries a little bit tame, and I really remember their presentation. And I came away with it with lots of questions that I didn't ask on the day, but lots of desires around Pallas. And it felt punkish, it felt countercultural. And that's another question I want to bring up, this idea of counterculture and the avant-garde. The, I think both terms, both sensibilities, whatever you want to call them, both critiques, both aesthetics, they have vanished without a trace, really. And but weirdly, in this programming, Palace are kind of invoking them. I want to just read through this a little bit, and this is the press release. So, Do It Together explores the impact and legacy of artist-run community making. There's that language again. The role of the artist-led in creating communities of artists and of working in and with their community settings. So there's community has come up in that first sentence, which is broken into a colon and some commas. Community is said there. One, communities. Two, community. Three. So three times community is said in that first line. The artist groups, projects, and spaces invited by Pallas to take part, each within their different set of circumstances, show us how artists come together as an alternative to commercial self-interest. Now that jumped out at me. Commercial self-interest. So what is the interest of Pallas? You have to ask that question. Is it for artists? Is it for kind of history? Because we're in the context of a 30-year celebration, let's call it, they are celebrating legacy. And when you look at the artists that have been invited in again, like Katie Holton, Brendan Early, who has been under the radar for a long, long time, Jesse Jones, Brian Duggan, Sarah Brown, and Garth Kennedy. In that list, there are three have represented Ireland in the Venice Biennale. John Smith, Ruth Clinton, and Niamh Moriarty, ESP TV, Scott Tiernan and Victoria Keddy, Robert Dunn, Venus Patel, and Paul O'Neill. Paul O'Neill is an academic. That's how I remember him when he was in NCID. And a personal selection of works and ephemera selected by Mark Cullen, Gavin Murphy, who are the original curators, and Eve Woods. So, like, I want to say that I've worked with Pallas with Small Light Projects. My first exhibition there with Small Light was there, the inaugural exhibition. I've also been commissioned by Pallas to write an essay, maybe around its 25th anniversary. It will also included a trip to Zagreb. So I've worked with them. I've critiqued and been their exhibitions over the years in reviews. I've been very affirmative in some of their exhibitions. You know, I've had this ongoing relationship with the space. I always wonder about Gavin Murphy and Mark Cullen and how their careers, let's call it, have fared as facilitators, directors of past projects. Um, I think the commercial self-interest angle is interesting because Mark Cullen and Gavin Murphy have never really been connected with commercial spaces. They have shown in publicly funded spaces, but not commercial, I think. So this is a real ideological press release. It has layers, it has leakages as well. Commercial self-interest to propose ways of being and care that are like here's these words, being and care. Well, Heideggerian and then very communitarian. And that reimagine civic, social, and cultural futures. So there's a lot of utopianism here also, drawing on Pallas's long-running and ongoing advocacy, research, and publishing on artist-run practices. The program draws on, reflects, and responds to the legacy and impact of artist-run antecedents. A. Bronson, General Idea, Art Metropole, Printed Matter, and Gordon Matta Clark's a pioneer of 112 Green Street, one of New York's first alternative artist-run venues, and co-founder of the artist-run restaurant food. So this is a kind of referencing or association to wonderful artist-run initiatives, but in the context of New York generally. We have one there from Canada, I think, also. Um, these are like general idea. I have lots of books by them. I know someone who subscribes to them also. Um, Printed Matter, I was there this year. Wonderful space for a kind of alternative spaces, the zine or the artist publication as an alternative space to the gallery space. Gordon Matta Clark, of course, especially his restaurant food also. And so these are icons of countercultural alternative DIY. Now, DIY versus DIT, do it together. This is really interesting because I remember Mark Fisher did a conference um, probably soon before he passed on DIY cultures, and he was interesting in the way he talked about DIY cultures, in that it wasn't, DIY implies or intimates that it's a do-it-yourself. It's a kind of neoliberal tendency in that you have to be self-driven and ambitious and competitive, and to be kind of outside the sphere of state-funded institutions. But he taught the opposite, that you have to work with the institution. And it's this kind of term, the what is it, the para institution. I think Kate Strain and others, curator, was doing a series on the para institution also. And so this is an institution that works alongside um, the main institutions. And artist-run spaces are kind of that because they're state-funded, especially in Ireland. They have that kind of structure or framework. Um, so yeah, so this idea of do it together, DIT, versus DIY is interesting because it feeds back in. That first paragraph is very institutional. It's very, you can see that as the main proposal for funding for this. It ticks all the boxes. Continued. This major exhibition features work by artists representing significant moments in Pallas's 30-year history, from its early days in Foley Street to the present day, with new or restaged works by Katie Holton, Brendan Early, Jesse Jones, Brian Duggan, who was part of the uh, earlier days, the early days of Pallas projects with Gavin and Mark Cullen, um, Sarah Brown and Garrett Kennedy, the artists I've listed there before. Um, and it's this program is run over two phases. Phase one shares the work of Publix, a curatorial and contemporary art commissioning agency with a dedicated library and exhibition space. in Valila, Helsinki, and Muin Veg Arts, sorry about my Irish, an artist-run project based in Carlow. This Moonbeg. This will be followed in phase two by contributions from Jenny Moran, Luncheonette, Dublin, and Kunsthal, Ghent, Belgium. Both phases of the exhibition sit within a brand new commission by collaborative art practice forerunner Andreas Kindler von Knobloch, Tom Watt, and Tanit Aaron, which will feature a set of modular exhibition architecture and an architectural intervention, transforming the Palace Project's gallery space. So, Forerunner, formerly known as individuals, Andreas Kindler von Knobloch, Tom Watt, and Tanit Aaron. I find these Forerunner interesting because when they emerged, especially Tom Watt and von Knobloch, as students, especially Tom Watt, actually, it was really. I remember seeing his graduate show in NCAD. I was so excited, and I went to see lots of the work that he and others produced for Basic Space in the Underground exhibition. Then, was it during COVID? He showed work in his attic, in a space in his attic. Maybe that was before COVID. Anyway, as an individual and as individuals, I always found him probably more organic and radical because weirdly, when they came together as a group, there was a kind of cohesion and it felt more institutional. It felt more um, favored by curators that wanted to create structures in exhibition spaces, well-made structures, and there was a kind of artisanship in it. Whereas before there was a kind of radical rawness in the individual artist's work. It was way more playful and experiment, destructive, I would say. It was way more destructive and open. Even though they created crawl spaces within these concrete, condensed, cohesive frameworks, sculptures, whatever you want to call them, it always felt almost prison-like. Um, um, so that's just one thing. It's interesting they've been invited back in because I know they've been part of other periodical reviews over the years. They created a framework for Kate Strain again in one of her when she was leading. When she was one of the invited curators for a periodical review years ago. In parallel, a number of works collected over the years by Pallas's artistic directors, Mark Cullen, Gavin Murphy, and Eve Woods. So it's interesting. The directors are Gavin and Mark, and Eve Woods is a curator. Often swapped, gifted, or exchanged will be introduced at intervals throughout the run of the exhibition alongside books, printed matter, there's that word again, and other ephemera. A series of talks, events, and screenings will accompany phase two alongside a free exhibition publication marking, that's great, free, 30 years of Palace Project. So, um, yeah, there's an image here of a previous work. So there's some questions I have here, and it's this idea of the artist run. The artist run in 96 was very different to the artist run today, especially an institution like Palace Projects, which is now an institution, which has a reputation, it has funding, um, it has survived its own flame. Um, so it's one of those trick candles that you can't put out, but they always have a kind of those trick candles don't have that burning sensation, do they? So I'm always wondering, is it best for an artist to kind of burn out or just elongate its its presence or its existence. And I say that with artists and also institutions. Is it better for an artist to just, go up in a puff of smoke and leave a trace of what it has done in 2, 3 years, rather than continually returning and being tolerated by the emergent artists that are looking for a foothold in the scene? And you have these legacy artists that continue on, and these are legacy artists that are being invited back in. And this is interesting because I feel artists now are retreating and institutions are retreating back into this mode of the archive. I've always had a critique of this, the archive fever, as Derrida called it. That where does that come from? Well, archive fever in Derrida's psychology was a fear of, as a 60 to 70-year-old philosopher, a fear of losing all of what he had written. So to archive that, he felt it coming on him because his father died at 70. And he became kind of anxious ridden. Before, anxiety was a good thing for Derrida because that's the seed of philosophy, it's the seed of art, anxiety. But now anxiety was, in old age, was something that was threatening, was violent. Um, so I'm just wondering about that. I'm wondering about the archive, how that emerges. Um, this idea of kind of borrowing radical ancestry, like printed matter, like there's that other Canadian collective File. I don't know if they are under Art Metropole or anyway, they're Canadian. And Canada is different than America, of course, because a lot of the arts are state funded. So, yeah, so there's something there in that. Um, this idea of heritage goes back to this idea of legacy rather than the artist run for me, especially as emerging artist, was countercultural. Like I have so many books around here. Like I'm getting a radiator put into my studio after 7 years of freezing winters. And I came across this book today, um, which was hiding on my shelf. The artist in the counterculture has Bruce Connor to Mike Kelly. It's very LA, I suppose, based, but fascinating. The artists that represent this idea of counterculture and the avant-garde in a particular way. So I'm kind of wondering where's the radicalness? When I was reviewing degree shows, I found radicality in the student exhibition and sometimes in the artist run. Um, but the rough edges of those spaces have been kind of smoothened off, and I just wonder about that. Also, this kind of celebration is kind of what does this represent? There's no question of what is now. They talk about futures in the press release, but there's no question of what is now. Like this idea of the present, like there's something about responding to the present and even critiquing yourself as an institution. Maybe there should be a critique, a self-critique here going on about the artist run and what it has become, especially in environments like urban environments where high rents, etc. It like weirdly at the time I was emerging from my MFA and trying to find where I could place myself as an artist. Um, it was a perfect time for Artist Run because it was the final financial crash, and there was so many Artist Run exhibition space that went up. They appeared like flames, but then disappeared. But they had a vitality when they were present. They really did. They presented an alternative. Are the artists listed in this legacy exhibition? an alternative, or they just, or do they represent a kind of a heritage? Um, this idea of restaging works that had a vitality in the past, but perhaps don't in this new context, don't. There's something about restaging a work in the museum. And it goes back to this idea of the museum again. Like when you set up a context like this, does the vitality of the artist run, this fragile entity, um, is that lost when you restage your work, resuscitate it in a new context? That's a question for, I suppose, when the exhibition takes place, or determination. Um, this idea of, I don't know, this idea of, I think the thing that stuck out for me most was this idea of the self-serving. What is the self-serving commercial space or whatever? Oh no, commercial self-interest. So does the artist run represent that commercial self-interest? Well, like I think I remember Pallas partnering with, you know, Gormley's auction house, maybe. I think they did that before. And this is a space where the secondary market plays out, where artists have no control of the price of their works. Um, as an auction house, it's very much part of the commercial enterprise. So there's lots of contradictions in this ideological stance. It's the thing that stands out, and it's the thing that kind of, as I think for me, when I first read it, that was the first thing that stood out. But I love those contradictions here. And that said, I think the artist run does need to be recontextualized, especially if it has lasted 30 years. And what does that mean? Who has gained? Who has been left out? All these questions are up in the air. And I'm just fascinated by, I think, first thing, Paz, Gavin, Mark, Eve have brought so much to the scene. Without them, you know, there's no alternative, really. But I think they also have to question their ideological stance, what they have gained from being part of Pallas, what artists haven't gained or have gained. I've gained by showing work in Pallas. I've gained from reviewing or experiencing work in that space. I've seen wonderful exhibitions there, some of my favorite, you know. And I evidenced that in my reviews. And then some of them I didn't find interesting and I critiqued them. But more often than not, Palace and its exhibition program, especially its self-directed one, where artists are given the freedom to really push out their solo sensibility in a space, rather than being part of these curated group shows, which is really the wheelhouse of the curator. It's not the artist. I think for me as a reviewer, as a critic, the solo exhibition has so much more depth. It always does. You can get some good group shows, but really they are diluted. And don't get to experience an artist, their fears, their fumbles, all that stuff in one place. Their artist statement, which has all these leakages. Um, but yeah, like I romanticize about the artist drum because it was where I learned how to be a writer. It wasn't a commercial space. Um, so this press release it's so layered and complicated because it's so ideological. It has all these players and actors and institutions, so they're teaming up with, I think it has a list here of people that they're working with. It's funded by the Arts Council, of course, the Department of Culture, Communication Support. They're working with IMA, NCAD. They've always had a tight link with NCAD. The estate of Gordon Matta Clark, Dublin Modular, whoever they are, and Paper Visual Art, which is another institution. It's not as old as Pallas, but it's probably 20 years old. So here's another institution that deals in the written word. And but they're all institutions. And when you see the list of names, they're all known quantities in a sense. Um, should this be part of the critique? I don't know. But it is that kind of that language do it together maybe is the thing that really prompted me to respond. And then when I dug into the press release, um, it offered more. And I think what is weird about this is that this statement, before the program even begins, shows where we are. It's a forecast also about the present and the present conditions of the artists and institutions and the relationship between artists and institutions and para institutions with institutions and between commerciality and state-funded arts. It's all in it, intertwined. Um, and that's the beautiful contradiction that, um, for me as a critic, but also now as an artist, as I return to painting, that's why I'm rejigging this studio to allow for that, but allow for a radiator, which is a gift. But yeah, I'm going to leave it there. I was just wanted to react to this in a kind of free way and just to see. I have my t-shirt. Nate Loman. I printed this. Nate Loman is an artist. I'll be dead soon. Snowman. Um, and I suppose it's anticipating my radiator, my new radiator. But Nate Loman is an artist. I think he's with the Gagosian talking about commercial um, and the musculature of the commercial. But he does works that are so fragile and weirdly, um, he represents for me perhaps a kind of radicality uh, that is more empathetic to the artist and the artist run, the fragility of being, and as the press release says, care. Um, and I think, overall, Palace has been a caring institution. Um, but it brings up a lot of stuff about where we are in relation to the arts. It is fragmented. This idea of collectivity and community, I'm not sure is real unless you're in a clique. And that word, clique and collectivity, one is negative, one is positive. But if you're in the clique, you have way more power and agency. And I remember Peter Schaldal, one of his later lectures, and he talks about how the best way to make it, especially in the New York art world, is to start in our college and create a group, a collective. And with the momentum of that group, with the shared resources, you can make an impact. And then, of course, artists will disband, the collective will disband, and reputations will be gained or lost in the fallout. I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening, and I'll probably be back again when something else pops up in my email. Thank you. Bye bye.